Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation, and look who we've got. We've got Bicylelegs finally on the channel. How's it going, Bicylelegs?
It's going well. It's nice to record one of these at night rather than early in the morning for those US time zones.
Absolutely, 100%. And today we are going to cover Emerson, Lake and Powell from 1986. So this was a standalone album. Greg Lake, Keith Emerson, Cozy Colin Powell, Carl Palmer was on the, still in the Asia fold. Bit of an unusual album, was a once and done. There was a tour, but I thought it was a good opportunity to get Bicylelegs on the show. And what we're going to do is a bit of a deep dive, talk about our first impressions of the album and maybe go track by track, what we like, what we don't like. So throw it away, Bicylelegs. So tell me what you think of this album.
Well, I really like this album. This album was important to me because, as I've mentioned on my own channel, I did a studio albums ranked of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I didn't include this album. But I discovered Emerson, Lake and Palmer as a 14-year-old in 1985, so just the year before this album came out. We had a box of records that had been donated to our scout troop because we were doing a garage sale, trash and treasure sale. And one night we were storing the stuff because we had a big underground garage under the house. And one night I pulled this box of records out and just started listening to things at random. And one of the first things I pulled out was Brain Salad Surgery. And not only was that the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album I'd ever heard, it was the first progressive rock album I'd ever heard. I'd grown up listening to sort of new wave and synth pop and the stuff that was in the charts in the 80s. And it was a real eye-opener for me that night because I also discovered King Crimson that night, and I discovered Patrick Moraz and bunch of other things. So it was really exciting when this album came out the next year because it was the first album that was related to Emerson, Lake and Palmer that came out as a brand new release when I was a fan. So it was really, really exciting for me. I remember seeing the film clip for Touch and Go and being really excited about that. And I bought the album as soon as I could, took it home, and I really, really liked it.
Yeah.
And going back and looking at it now, sort of with the benefit of 35 years of hindsight, I still think there's a lot on this album to like. So
great. Well, good stuff. My awareness of this album was probably off Cozy Powell because I'm an uber Whitesnake fan.
yeah,
And Cozy was in the 1984 Slide It In lineup. And it was just huge news that they did the Rock and Rio performance. So you had Coverdale, Sykes, Neil Murray and Cozy Powell, and Powell left and he joined ELP.
yeah.
So that was really big news. And soon enough, the album hit the various record stores. I wasn't into that progressive rock and curious enough down that rabbit hole to actually buy it. But it was probably a record fair about 5-6 years ago that I saw it and I picked it up. And as you can see, this is an ex-radio copy, and it was in pretty good condition. And I played it, and I don't mind it. I don't mind it, and I'll talk more about it. Whether I think it's a great album, we'll shoot the breeze about that. But it was probably the Cozy Powell connection that he left a band that was probably on the rise, and that could be sort of accounted for by the 1987 album to join another outfit. And the Cozy Powell, that's a whole different story, just a long journey. So, all right, well, maybe we could just go down song by song and you just tell me what you think. So the first song on the album is The Score. What do you think of that song?
I thought it was a wonderful album opener. I really did. I like the fact that it's a mainly instrumental track. It's fairly long. It only has a couple of verses though of singing. A lot of it's like about 3 or 4 minute introduction where they really sort of go through their chops, particularly Keith and Cozy. The one thing I will say about this album is I feel like Greg Lake's bass is not very high up in the mix for a lot of it. Whereas I feel on a lot of the sort of classic ELP stuff, you could hear the bass a lot more.
Yeah.
But I really like, it really, the musical chops I think are great. A lot of people have like a really bad problem with the synth sounds on this album. But I actually quite like them. I think, although in the film clips, I think you see Keith playing sort of like Korg synthesizers and things like that. For me, I feel like a lot of the sounds on this are still him using his Yamaha GX1 that he was using in the sort of Works period. They sound very similar to the keyboard sounds that are on the Works albums and Love Beach.
Yep.
But I think it's a great album opener. It's like 9 minutes long, so it's got that sort of epic grandeur to it that you want from an ELP album. And as I say, Keith and Cozy's playing in particular on that song are really good. Greg Lake's voice is still really good on this album too. Like when he came back for the ELP albums in the 90s, his voice had definitely darkened somewhat, which I have recently read was because he'd spent too long as a heavy chain smoker. But in 86, his voice still sounded really, really good. So I think it's a great album opener.
Okay. I think it sounds a little bit Tangerine Dream with that the synth. So you've got a synth drum beat, and you've got the bass, and it's got that sort of to me it's got a bit of a Tangerine Dream feel to it until the Hammond lifts off, and you go, okay. We're in ELP territory, and you know, and then Cozy's drums thunder in. There's been a bit of criticism about Cozy's drumming. He's very confined, because the Cozy I like is rainbow Cozy, big, bombastic, you know, a lot of his signature fills. But in this album, all the way through, he's very confined, and this song he's metronomic. The cymbals have that kind of a little bit off. They're very sort of clangy. I don't know if it's something to do with the production, but that was something that I noticed. And then you've got the typical Keith Emerson fanfare keys. You know, there's this theme all the way through, actually all the way through the whole album. It's just fanfare. And the lyrics are a bit of a sort of looking back to the past. I've written it down. What's your game? It's been so long. You're welcome back, my friends. So it's just sort of a nod to the past. But yeah, it's not a bad opener. But again, you sort of notice it's not the ELP. If you're, you know, used to the 70s and you're used to something like this, or this, you know, you're going to hear something different. And I think that's a lot of the problems that these bands had in Bicylelegs coming from the 70s and going into the 80s. How would they update their sound? Are they going to be like Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers? Are they going to be Yes? Or are they going to, you know, try to sort of mine the sound of where they were in the 70s and see how they go?
I think with this album, they tried to do a little bit of like have a foot in each camp. So like a song like this is definitely hearkening back to their sort of 70s sound, very progressive sort of melodies, and it's a long piece. As I say, it's 9 minutes long. Whereas songs like Touch and Go and a lot of the songs on side 2 are your sort of shorter, poppier songs. So I think they were definitely sort of trying to put a foot in both camps. But that lyric you were mentioning is a callback specifically to First Impression Part 2 on Brain Salad Surgery. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends.
Yeah, sort of a little bit of a connection, bit of a lineage.
I think the whole lyric was just sort of a "we're back, fellas" sort of thing.
Ta-da!
Yes.
All right. the next one is Learning to Fly.
I think,
So
yeah, I think this is the best short song on the album. It's a concise song. It's sort of, you know, how long is it? The 3.5 minutes, or just under 4 minutes.
yep.
And but it definitely still has those progressive hallmarks. It's not trying to be a pop song.
Mm.
The lyric, I think, is probably one of the stronger lyrics on the album too. You know, we've all got to jump, so I'm learning to fly. I always liked that lyric.
Yep.
What you were saying about Cozy's drum sound on this album, I'm not as familiar with you as with his sort of overall discography. I know bits
Yep.
and pieces of it. And I think you're right about it, not sort of having as many flourishes. But I think also there's two things. One, he's a very different drummer from Carl Palmer.
Oh, absolutely.
Carl Palmer was a much jazzier drummer, whereas Cozy's very much a rock drummer.
Yes.
And then the other thing is this does have a very, very 80s production on the drum sound. Like
It
the
does.
drums sound huge on this album, but they sound very, very produced. They don't sound
Gated.
natural at all.
Yes.
So
That's the thing that is a point of contention with a lot of those 80s albums. How do you tolerate the gated cannon drum sound or not? But yeah, look, I think this song is an anthem. The lyrics are nice. It's all about personal development, really.
yeah.
There is a little bit of modern synth. There's those modern synth stabs. But I don't think it's one of the strongest. Just probably Critics'
Yeah.
Corner. It's a little bit not as distinguished as some of the other tracks, but yeah. So all right, well that's Learning to Fly. The Miracle.
The
What do you
Miracle.
think of that one?
Possibly the best song on the album for mine.
Yep.
Again, a more extended track. It's about 7 minutes long. It's got some really nice synth sounds in it, I think. Going back to the drum sound thing, for me, that was never a big problem because I grew up in the 80s. I grew up with those gated drum sounds. So that's kind of how I expected drums to sound in 1986. So I didn't have
Yep.
a problem with it at the time. Nowadays, I can listen to it and go, oh, yeah, that does sound very artificial, doesn't it?
I defend it. I've defended it quite a bit on this channel. I think my first ever show was Never Let Me Down, me versus Reed Little, and it
Oh,
was
yeah.
all about the 80s production. I love that album. But I guess, yeah, I'm like you. I was a child of the 80s, and the gated drums are everywhere.
Yes.
But when you hear a lot of the albums that have been stripped back and brought back to the organic and how they sound, you go, wow, wouldn't it have been good if it sounded like that? Like Whitesnake 1987, Coverdale's put out an album and he's just stripped all the gated drums and he's just put it back to what it should sound like, the original organic drumming, and it just sounds fantastic. So it just makes you wonder how some of these albums would sound if it just had the authentic organic drum sounds.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I'd still like some production on the drums on this album, but maybe I think with this album, the drum sound's definitely a sort of too much is never enough sort of thing. They really did layer it on thick. Hugh Padgham and Phil Collins have a lot to answer for with that gated drum sound.
Well, yes, I've got nothing to say on that. I agree with you 100%. Yeah, I agree. This is an outstanding track. It's a great closer. Well, there's only 3 tracks on the first side, but his bass is just driving along Greg Lake, and Anthem keyboard. And I think I wrote down in my notes, it's a bit of a throwback to the old ELP.
Yeah, it's probably the song on this album that has the most Hammond on it too, which, Keith hadn't been using a lot of Hammond since probably Brain Salad Surgery. There's no Hammond at all really on Works volumes 1 or 2 or on Rock
Mm,
Beach. It's all the Yamaha GX1 synthesizer.
yep.
And this one, you know, when the Hammond kicks in that
Mm,
middle passage, it's like, oh yeah, that takes me back.
absolutely. Just for throwing a curveball. So
Mm.
you're the executive of Polygram Records, Bicyclelegs. How would you have marketed this album? Would you have marketed it to the Pink Floyd crowd, who had a second wind
Mm.
with Dave Gilmour, the Roger Waterless albums, which did really well?
They did wonderful business, yeah.
Would you have tried to go down that rabbit hole, or would you have gone down the Yes rabbit hole of that, you know, Owner of a Lonely Heart, the Trevor Horn production, the MTV years, flashy? How would you have done it
Well,
if you
again,
were the Pellegrim guy?
I don't know that it necessarily had to be an either or. I
Mm,
think you could have marketed the album to that Pink Floyd sort of crowd, sort of the people who still wanted that progressive sound and all that sort of thing, but
yep.
still had the single on MTV and that sort of thing to try and appeal to the more single market.
Mm,
You know, I think you could have done both.
yeah. The album didn't do well. It stiffed,
Mm.
and I think that the what was the song off the album, Touch and Go, only
Yeah.
sort of went to number 60 in the Billboard charts. But when you've got the album here, so you're going to your Walmart in America, or you're going to your Rocking Horse in
Yeah.
Brisbane, Brashes or Palings or whatever, and you're looking at this, there's no photos. You don't know
Mm.
who's in there. You've got to, you know, obviously those nuts that know all the prog rock from the 70s, they would know, oh, ELP, they're
Yeah.
back. But how are they going to get that new generation? Because it's sort of an indescriptive type of Picasso-looking album cover.
Yeah.
And, you know, how do you sell it?
I don't know. I mean, it worked for Pink Floyd. They, you know, they never appeared on their album covers after the first couple.
Absolutely, but
So
they're like an entity unto itself.
yes,
The most valuable player in that band is the name Pink
yes.
Floyd. But with ELP, yeah,
Well,
isn't
yeah,
it funny that Powell, yeah, the P,
yes,
they didn't have to do ELF or something else, or ELO for God's sakes, but they were able to wing Powell with P, and they actually they auditioned a lot of drummers, and they asked him.
yes.
He was actually a close friend of Greg Lake's, I believe, or
I think it was Keith's actually.
Keith's, yeah.
Yeah,
But he wasn't too happy about it. I don't think. I've read a few interviews in research for this show, and
yeah,
he didn't seem to be too pleased about this effort. But it's definitely, you know, when you sort of change the alchemy, it's different. You know, when you change the players, it is, you can tell it's not quite the same as ELP in the 70s. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I don't think that ELP in the 70s would have worked in 1986 anyway. So, I mean, they had to do something different. Whether this, I mean, marketing wise, obviously it didn't do great because the album didn't sell very well. I don't think that's because it's a terrible album. I think it's because it just wasn't what the market was looking for. It didn't have an Owner of a Lonely Heart on it. And it didn't quite appeal to the Pink Floyd crowd. And even then, you look at Momentary Lapse of Reason, it did have a single on it that did quite well.
Yeah, got a lot of radio
Learning to
airplay.
Fly, also called Learning to Fly. How about that?
Yes, I was waiting for
But
you to say that. Yeah, but that song was just flogged on radio. I don't know, was
yeah,
it flogged in Brisbane on Triple M in Sydney? That song was just on the hour. Um, that album, I think, just sold bucket loads off that song. And Pink
mm,
Floyd are not really a singles band. I mean, gee,
no,
before that would have been Another Brick in the Wall.
yes.
That would have been the only single. But yeah, all right. Well, that's that song, The Miracle. Touch and Go. What do you think of that one?
Touch and Go is a pretty simple song. It's a pretty obvious attempt to write a single, I think.
Mm.
But I think it's a reasonably good single as far as Emerson, Lake and Palmer goes. Again, not a singles band, never really were. And when they did have singles, it was usually sort of the Greg Lake ballad, you know, like Lucky Man or
Mm.
From the Beginning. You know, those were sort of the two big singles in the US. And then they had a big hit in the UK with Fanfare for the Common Man.
Which is the signature. You know,
Yes.
if you're gonna say to somebody what is ELP, that's in their head,
Oh,
because it's been on every sports show or every, you know, it's been on commercials.
well,
That's their most well known.
before I knew that Emerson, Lake and Palmer existed, I knew that song because it used to be used as the theme music for a local TV show called Chris Conroy's Wonderful World of Boats.
Um, Down in our parts, it was the Wide World of Sports.
Yeah.
So on Channel 7. So, and they do a sports package, and that would be it. And it's a great one for, you know, and it's sort of like it's got that sort of Olympic feel to it.
Yes.
You know. So yeah, that's definitely the signature one. But yeah, look, Touch and Go, it's probably a bit cliched, the lyrics.
Mm.
I think they're trying really hard to have a hit. Funny enough, it was based on a folk song called Lovely Joan.
Yes, the riff in it.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it ended up on a soundtrack called MacGruber. I don't know if you ever saw that. Maybe it
No.
went straight to video, one of those Saturday Night Live movies,
Oh, okay.
parodies. So that's Touch and Go. Yeah, I think it's a bit average. I actually think side one is stronger,
Oh,
except for one
definitely.
song, but I'll talk about that shortly. But there's a bit of a lull. Um, Love Blind.
Love Blind is probably one of the weakest songs on the album for mine. I just
Mm,
think it's I don't know what to say about it. It's
AOR.
yeah, pretty much. It's a pop song. It's AOR. The lyric is unmemorable.
Poor
There's a
Man's Asia.
there's a couple of nice little keyboard flourishes in it, but
Mm,
like there's a nice little solo from Keith on it. But other than that, it really doesn't have an awful lot
yeah,
to go for it.
yeah. A Yes B side, maybe. I don't know.
Mm,
It's not really good. Not really good. I agree with you on that one. Then we get into some interesting little diversions.
yes.
Step Aside. Bit
Step
of a
Aside is the
bit of a
song that
jazzy number, that one.
yeah, and I really like it. It's a really good change of pace for the album. I've always loved with ELP when Keith gets behind the ivories and plays piano because I think he's an absolutely or was an incredible piano player. And he plays some absolutely gorgeous piano on this song. And Greg, as I say, he shows he still has the vocal chops at this stage of his career. So yeah, I like it as a change of pace on the album. You know, ELP were not averse to doing jazzy pieces, and I think it works quite well.
Yeah, I like it. But the musical jazzy flourishes are completely at odds with the lyrics, because you read the
Mm,
lyrics, it's sort of don't stuff with me, don't mess with me.
mm,
It's quite an angry little sort of song. He's the character or the protagonist is angry against the world. I wrote anger management. But I also wrote that, yeah, he's got a lot of pizzazz in the piano, and yeah, it's a nice little sort of little ditty. Yeah, I think yeah, I like that one a lot. Then you've got Lay Down Your Guns. I'm
uh,
interested to hear what you think of
mm.
this one.
Yeah, no, this is my least favorite song on the album. I think it's a obvious. You know, they're going for the ballad. Um, when ELP did a ballad in the 70s, it was usually Greg Lake and his acoustic guitar, and they were usually lovely songs. I always really liked them. This is real AOR, drippy, going for the power ballad.
Mm,
You know, as much as I love Chicago, it kind of has a bit of that sort of 80s Chicago schlock
yeah.
vibe to it, and it just doesn't work at all for me.
Absolutely. I think it's a very dreary song. And I wrote down, reminded me of Brothers in Arms, and I can't stand that song.
Oh, okay.
You know, Dire Straits,
Yeah.
you know, sort of that sort of maudlin, contrive, let's be pacifist and not use violence.
Mm,
We are the world sort of thing. A little bit of gated drums in this one as well.
mm,
So yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. Then we get into the last song,
mm.
Bicylelegs. What do you think of this one?
Mars, the Bringer of War.
Yes.
In the great tradition of ELP classical covers.
Yeah,
Apparently, Cozy was the one who brought this to the band.
absolutely.
He used to do it as like his drum feature in, I can't remember which band, but
Yeah.
and it was his idea to do it. And apparently, Keith was very against it.
Mm,
At first, he thought it wouldn't work, but Cozy was like, no, 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 if we do it like this and we do this, this, and this,
yeah.
and he sort of talked him around into it. And I think it is one of their really good. I think they've always done really good sort of classical,
Yep.
rock versions of classical. Even on the much maligned Love Beach, Canario on that album, I think is a stellar standout track on that album. And it's a cover of a classical piece.
Mm,
And yeah, this is great. It's where those massive drums work the best, I think. I think Keith gets some of his most interesting synth sounds out of this. Yeah, I think it's a triumph on the album. I think it's a wonderful way to close the record out.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's a great album closer. Look, Cozy always had a signature drum solo to classical music. It'd be 633 Squadron, it'd be the 1812 Overture, which he did in Rainbow quite a bit, and Whitesnake. Check out the Castle Donington video. This was apparently done by King Crimson. I'm not a big King's Crimson sort of aficionado, but apparently this had been done. And Cozy did have to do a fair amount of convincing. And I think he showed footage of how he did it in Rainbow and Whitesnake. And they go, I get it. I understand
Yes.
it. And I think it works wonderfully. It's
Yeah.
bombastic, and that's what we want.
Yeah.
We want bombast in ELP.
King Crimson did do a cover of Mars the Bringer of War in their sets from their very first tours in 1969. And then when they went to record their second album, they couldn't get permission from the estate of Gustav Holst to actually do it. So they adapted a similar sounding piece, but an original called The Devil's Triangle, which made it actually even more terrifying sounding. It's well worth checking out. It's the mellotrons on that King Crimson Devil's Triangle are some of the scariest mellotrons you will ever hear in your life.
Well, it's got the devil's chords in this song.
Yes,
this music, so it really hits the sweet spot, and I love it. I think it's a bit of a shame because, as I said, this is a once and done album, and it hints at what could have been done for part two.
Yes.
So I think it's their most complete. So I think if you're looking at the album, what are the three strongest songs for you? Just in summary, just to recap.
Well, for me, as being sort of a prog head that I have been since the sort of mid 80s, I think that the three long songs are the ones for me. I like The Score, I like The Miracle, and I like Mars the Bringer of War.
Well, I'm not a copycat, but I'm exactly the same as you. I think they're the three strongest. Isn't it funny? I was just looking at the album. Look at your album cover out on the back and side two. Mars the Binger of War. They forgot to put an R, or maybe mine is a misprint.
No. Mine's missing it too. It's there's a space for it, but they just left it out.
What does that mean?
I don't know. They just dropped a letter when they were doing the text for it. It's on the CD.
Yes.
I don't know if the two bonus tracks on the CD are at all worth talking about?
I haven't listened to those.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
familiar, so go for it, please. Please do.
I think they're both the sort of bonus tracks that you listen to and you think, that's why they left these off the album.
Yeah.
The first one is an instrumental cover, I shit you not, of The Locomotion.
Right. Interesting.
And it's cheesy as hell. It really is.
Yep.
Doesn't work at all. And then the second bonus track is a song called Vacant Possession, and it's very much in the same sort of vein as Lay Down Your Guns. It's a sort of a ballady, AOR-y, mushy sort of song that, for me just doesn't really work.
Yeah.
It's a pity that that's what they had to put as bonus tracks, that they didn't have anything better to put on the CD for bonus tracks. But
yeah, 100%. Now, this came out in 1986. How do you think this would have gone in 1982? Do you think the timing was not right? It was maybe just too late in the decade? Because when you think of 1986, this sticks out like a sore thumb. It is not in touch with the times. I'm thinking of what was popular in the charts, and just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Stock Aitken and Waterman. I'm thinking of hair metal. I'm thinking of Metallica as starting on the rise. I'm thinking popular music. It really is sort of like a very sweet throwback to the past, but it sticks out. What do you think?
I think that's pretty much right. I mean, even when you look at sort of what was happening in progressive music in the sort of mid 80s, you had Marillion. They came out with
Misplaced Childhood,
which, although it very much had that progressive feel to it, I mean, it's a concept album. It's basically one whole piece of music. It also just managed to have 2 massive hit singles on it.
Kaylee.
Yeah, Kaylee and Lavender were both top 10 hits. So that was sort of, it was the exception rather than the rule. And then Pink Floyd, as you say, Pink Floyd are Pink Floyd. They are a law unto themselves as far as music goes. But you look at, progressive rock. I mean, even the sort of neo-progressive subgenre that was coming through in England, really only Marillion made it out of that. IQ were never popular on the charts. They were always a cult band. Pendragon, Palace, none of those bands ever sort of cracked the mainstream. I think progressive rock's time had passed. That's why Yes went in the... Well, I mean, even then, look at 90125. That wasn't originally even meant to be a Yes album. That was meant to be an album by a completely new band called Cinema.
Yes.
And it was only when John Anderson came in to sing the lead vocals that he said, well, we really have to call this Yes. It really... I love that album. I think it's a fabulous album, but it really has nothing to do with what Yes did up to that point.
You'd be disappointed if you think the 70s output is like that particular album. They're 2 different entities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember having discovering Peter Gabriel era Genesis, because I'd grown up, like, my first Genesis album that I ever heard was Abacab. And so I thought that's what Genesis did, And there are still touches of the progressive on Abacab, things like Dodo Lurker.
Yep.
But other than that, it's very much a pop album. Even though it, sometimes it skews a bit weird. In the 80s, pop was allowed to skew weird.
Yeah.
But it was not progressive rock. And when I went back and firstly discovered that Peter Gabriel, who to me was a completely separate artist, had been in Genesis, that was like, I didn't know that. And then secondly, I think the first Genesis album I bought from the Peter Gabriel era was Nursery Crime. And that could not be more different.
Mm.
than sort of Abacab and Genesis 83 album and Invisible Touch
Yeah,
and all that sort of
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah.
So I think because this album tried to have it a bit both ways, it ended up being neither one thing nor the other.
And that was the big impediment. I don't think you've got to have the right label, because I think history has sort of validified that there are some labels that weren't really good at marketing. So if ELP were on Warner's or Sony, this could have been a blockbuster, because they were really good at the marketing, and they
Yeah.
would really sort of pitch it in and drop the album at the right audience. But Polygram, you know, I don't think we're as strong.
I think they were a little stuck in the past, Polydor.
Yeah. I mean, even with Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers, that should have been a Led Zeppelin blockbuster. I'm going diverging a little bit, but
Yeah.
the Perfect Strangers should have been #1 all around the world. It should have been multi-platinum, but it only did like, I think, single platinum in America, went top 5 in the UK. It should have been much more successful. The tour was very successful, but it didn't sort of go into the stratosphere. And I sort of think that it's probably Polygram. I know they're based in Holland. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bicylelegs. They're very European.
Yeah, it's either Holland or Germany, one of the two.
And they're connected with MCA, or I don't know what their subsidiary is in America, but you've got to have the right label. And in the 80s, Warner's and Sony, well, they weren't called Sony, they were called CBS, weren't they?
Well, CBS here in Columbia.
Yeah,
in the US.
Columbia. They were really good at just marketing and flogging the crap out of these albums and pushing them. So you just needed the right label, and they would have got them to, possibly may have got them to Genesis status.
And again, that's where Pink Floyd had a big advantage, because they were on Columbia in North America. So
Absolutely. And it doesn't, I mean, look, but Pink Floyd, they continued through, because ELP, they finished up, I mean, Love Beach 78, is it?
78, yes.
78. And that was it. Did that do commercially okay?
No, it bombed.
It flopped.
It bombed. Most people hate that album. I actually did a video on my channel where I defended that album.
Not, you can't defend the cover.
Oh, no. The cover is like bad Bee Gees pastiche.
Yep.
But there is some good music on that album. There's some crap on it too, but there is some worthwhile music on that album. And yeah, that was why they broke. I mean, they didn't even really want to make that album. It was contractual obligation. So, and then there was a live album in 79 and a best of, but then, yeah, they were done.
Yeah, well, that's with Pink Floyd. They kept on going. And it helps when you've got that phenomenal The Wall that really set it up, whether it had Roger Waters or not. Whoever was in the band, it was the band name Pink Floyd, and they just kept on keeping on.
Well, that's where I think a band like Pink Floyd actually benefited from being sort of relatively faceless. That, you know, to the regular punter, it didn't matter that Roger Waters wasn't there anymore, even though he'd written most of the songs for the last 3 albums.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And there's the whole thing about a lot of these prog bands, they do hide behind a fancy cover, but you don't know who it is. And sometimes it can be a benefit, and sometimes it can't. I mean, yes, with Owner of a Lonely Heart, you don't really know what they look like. It had that really weird 15-minute concept video. I don't know what your thoughts on that video were, but it was really the focus on not too much on John Anderson and the band, but more on the MTV movie.
Yes, and it did very well on MTV. So
yeah.
Whereas I think, you know, you did the video for Touch and Go. You had the 3 guys in the video, but most people wouldn't have connected it with that album sleeve, because it's like, you know,
they're not the most unphotogenic guys.
No.
I've seen worse. I think, you know, they had a bit of suavo about it. You know, I think you could have at least put a photo on the back. Anyway, that's polygram. All right. Well, yeah. So I think we agree the score, the miracle, and the Mars, the bringer of war, or the binger of war, if you're looking at the album cover. I would. What would you give this out of 10 or out of 5 stars? I'd probably give it 3 out of 5.
I'd probably give it a 3.5.
Very good.
Back in 1986, I would have given it 4.5. I adored it, but now I can see some of the flaws in it. But I was just so excited to have new Emerson, Lake and Palmer
Powell,
ELP.
yeah.
You know, just new ELP music when I'd only just discovered the band the year before. To me, was, you know, I could forgive any faults because it was just new music and I loved it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your time, Bicylelegs. Please check out Bicylelegs, you know, YouTube channel. There's plenty of great content on there. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. And look, I'm going to get you on the channel again. We'll do some more stuff, maybe some Australian content. Got to get more Australian content out there. But no, really, really good to have you on. And yeah, we'll catch up soon. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.